Hi, I'm Nick Cosentino, and I'm a Principal Software Engineering Manager at Microsoft. In this video interview, I had the absolute pleasure of sitting down with Dan Patrascu-Baba, who's also known as Codewrinkles on YouTube and social media. And this video interview was really special for me because when I first started making content on YouTube, and I think I probably had around 300 subscribers at the time, Dan had significantly more than me, and it was really awesome because he put together a video that was shouting out some of the smaller channels. So it was really cool for me to be able to have him back on my channel, interview him, talk about software development, talk about all of the career experiences and stuff that he has, because it looks very interesting compared to a lot of sort of traditional journeys that people expect for software engineers. So Dan is someone that I really enjoy talking with on social media. I really, admire him. I think he's got great perspectives to share. And like I said, this was really special for me to be able to do. So I think you're really going to enjoy it. I certainly did. And sit back, enjoy, and I'll see you next time. Dan, if you don't mind, if you want to give viewers and listeners a bit of background for who you are and kind of where you started, and as early as you want to go back in time.
Okay, yeah, sure. My name is Dan, and I'm also kind of like very active on YouTube and on social media. Probably some folks would know me as Codewrinkles, and I am like professionally writing software for around 11 or 12 years already. Right now, I'm a technical director at a company that's called Amdaris, and basically, as a technical director, I unfortunately don't write as much code as I would like, because my main job is to actually take care about the quality of the delivery, like the technical quality of the delivery for the customers, because we are mostly doing outsourcing. So that's a very, very important topic. And some of my other responsibilities as a technical directors are, for instance, to assist our sales in technical pre-sales discussion, to evaluate and assess our clients or potential clients' needs, and trying to find out the right technology or the right solutions that we need to offer them, because it's not always just about coding. We cover like everything around cloud, not cloud, what do they already have, what do they need, can we change something to that. So I, as a technical director, I also jump into those discussions to evaluate and to set up actually then the project properly with the proper people and the proper know-how.
Very interesting. Yeah.
And yeah, where I started, that's actually a great question. And probably my journey is a little bit, let's say, not that natural or what you would expect regularly
Sure.
from engineers. That very often is something like, okay, I went to college, and then I learned programming, and then I got into an internship, and then, well, I basically climbed the ladder then,
Right.
because right when I finished high school, I didn't know exactly about programming, and I had this preconceived idea that in order to become a programmer, you need to be excellent, very good at maths.
Right. Yep.
And yeah, mathematics was something that was totally strange to me. I didn't like it all. Like, obviously, I wasn't bad at high school. I would say I was pretty good, but mathematics, I really, it was always a struggle, and I didn't like it. And the idea that, okay, to become a programmer, you need to actually do this. There was for me kind of like an equality check between programming and mathematics.
Right.
And I understand nowadays that mathematics might help and might fit in usefully in some cases, but it's not a sign of equality
Right.
between them. And therefore, what I went through to study in college actually was philosophy first. So I went to study philosophy. I was really a lot also into this kind of like social sciences stuff. I was also fairly good at writing, even, let's say, fictional, non-fictional. So I did write quite some stuff. So I went to philosophy. And then it happened that kind of like I had the opportunity to actually go and study abroad, so not in Romania,
Oh,
where I'm
awesome.
based, and I had the opportunity to go to study in Rome, in Italy, and basically I also received some money there to study, so I didn't have to pay anything. I had where to stay, I had food and everything. So basically, I just needed to study. and I really enjoyed it very much. And then when I finished my philosophy study, there was this other opportunity and another passion that I have discovered there, which was theology.
Okay,
So
yeah.
I just took that opportunity and I went on to study theology, also in Rome. So I basically studied in Rome for 6, 7 years, in total 7, because I had 1 year of adjustment.
Wow.
Uh, so yeah, it was kind of cool, and I don't really regret it. But the more I kind of like studied, like at the very beginning, to be honest, when I started to study theology, I had this idea that I want to become a priest, maybe. However, things didn't really turn out that way, and well, that idea faded away quite rapidly. Even though I really enjoyed the studies, so when I came back, so when I finished the studies, and there was this idea, I knew I don't want to remain in Italy. I
Okay.
always wanted to come back to my country, to Romania. So there was the question, okay, but what can I do there? Like in Romania, you have to imagine like it was the period about 2010 to 2009, maybe. Yeah, because I returned in 2009, and there weren't too many opportunities. Kind of like it's the same today. So I had this idea because I come from a family that kind of like um, let's say we struggled a little bit financially.
Okay.
So I had this idea that I want to do something that that would allow me to have a little bit like a better life, would say.
Right.
So there was a choice to make. So what can I do there in Romania to kind of like also earn some money that I can afford a good living, a decent living? Becoming a teacher, which was one of the options with my studies, unfortunately was not a good idea, because teachers are, let's say, paid awfully in Romania, like
That seems to be a common
even
thing in many
nowadays,
places, unfortunately. Yeah.
unfortunately. Although teachers should be actually paid very highly from my point of view, because they build basically the next generations, and
Yeah.
that's a huge responsibility actually. So teachers should be definitely paid very,
Agreed.
very well. So by that time in Romania, like you had this opportunity to, maybe if you become a doctor or something, that you can have a good life, but not from, let's say, a regular job. But there was this one area where people were paid very good, and that was IT.
Okay.
Now, IT was something that was not really well, totally strange to me, or let's say a stranger, because I was kind of like passionate about it. So I was kind of like that guy that was installing Windows basically for everybody, and
Right.
fix their computers and things like that. But my knowledge about IT kind of like stopped there. So it didn't go beyond that at that point. But I said, okay, maybe I find an opportunity to get into IT somehow, and then try to learn, to evolve, and see where that gets me. And fortunately, I found a place to start, not because of my IT knowledge, because I said it was limited at installing Windows,
Right.
which is not much in the end in this area, but because the fact that I was speaking fluently German.
Oh.
Yes,
Okay.
because I've studied basically in a school in Romania. We have these schools where you can study literally everything in a certain language, like German or Hungarian. The reason behind is that we had historically very big communities of German speaking people, or Hungarian speaking people, or in my area Serbian speaking people. So you can do the schools basically in those languages, which means that you study everything in that language, like mathematics, chemistry, everything except Romanian, which you study in Romanian obviously. But everything else you study in that language. And I was in such a German school, so I studied everything in German. So I was speaking fluently German. So there was this huge, or basically big company. I'm not sure if we are allowed to name companies here on this
It's fine.
podcast.
Fine by me
Um,
if you're
okay,
comfortable with it. Yeah, that's fine.
I am definitely. So it was Bosch. I think you know about Bosch, but
Yeah. Yeah.
they had a call center in my town, like in Timișoara, that was kind of like a call center, but on the IT part.
Okay.
Like basically employees from all around or mostly Germany, they were just calling there when they had problems. Hey, how do I do that? I can't access my calendar. I can't do this and I can't do that. So we were helping them basically as an IT help desk. And I started there basically with my knowledge. Like the pay was not great at that point.
Sure.
It was actually fairly terrible as a call center agent. But I always saw this as an opportunity to kind of like, this is the start. But from
Right.
here, I can learn things and maybe I can evolve to do something better. So I took this as an opportunity and started to learn whatever I could learn there about things that I didn't know. And there I started to learn some basics about Active Directory, for instance, basics about Exchange Server at that point, some basics about, let's say, Outlook, but
Right.
mostly Active Directory and Exchange Server is what I have concentrated. Now, there are challenges because what you're doing in a call center, you can basically imagine that it's not much. So the opportunity to learn is not that great. So you learn some things. Obviously, if you don't know anything, you have the opportunity to learn, but you arrive at a certain point where you can't go further, basically, because it's the nature of the job and the things that you need to do. In call centers, they really don't put that emphasis on kind of like you have to learn more because, hey, that's the job that you need to do. You don't need to know more than this for this job, you know?
Right.
Because for the things that weren't easily solvable, let's say, you needed to simply just redirect the ticket to some other team that would hand it locally or something like
Right.
that.
There's like specialties of people that would go handle things beyond a certain point, and then you kind of get back to helping triage the calls that are coming in and getting people sorted out.
Yeah, exactly. So then basically I learned whatever I could learn there about Active Directory. Obviously, I spent a lot of time also besides what I could learn at the job to understand better Active Directory and Exchange Server and things like that. And then after 1 year and a half, obviously, I started to look for opportunities for jobs that were not call center and that were more specialized about Active Directory and potentially Exchange Server. Those were the areas that I was mostly specialized in, if we can call it. Although my knowledge was kind of like very, very low still, and a little bit of networking. So I also needed to learn a little bit of networking. So that was the time when I started to understand what DNS is, what an
Right.
DHCP is, how things work over the network, the protocols, and so on. So I started to look for new opportunities, and that's where kind of like happened something that I would say changed my career for the better.
Okay.
And that's when I was hired at Microsoft, you know. So kind of like I'm not sure when you started at Microsoft.
About 4 years ago now, like just over 4 years,
Okay,
like 4 years
so
and a month kind of thing.
we never were colleagues then, because kind of like I think in 2015 I stopped working there, but it was the year 2010, and by then there was something that nowadays seems kind of like okay, obvious, but you know that it was just the period when Office 365 started.
Right.
Like that was the period when Microsoft started to have this push on Office 365, and also in Microsoft they were building teams, like support teams for this technology. You know, obviously I didn't know anything about Office 365, about Exchange Online, about things like that,
I feel like
but
Microsoft itself probably didn't know
yeah,
much about it at that point. So
obviously, yeah. So the interviews that they were doing were mostly okay, Active Directory questions, Exchange Server questions, and obviously, you know, like I'm not sure if people are aware, but even if you work in support at Microsoft, like I was working in Premier support. I think there are still the Premier contracts, like the big customers, like
right.
BMW, like Coca-Cola, whatever. So you need to do support for them, which means that basically when their IT doesn't know how to go further, you need to jump in. which means that you need to know your stuff,
Yeah.
because it's kind of like, well, if they don't know at BMW how to go further with something, and they expect you to help them, so it means obviously that you need to know your stuff. Obviously, you also have all the knowledge that is inside Microsoft, so you can definitely access that. So you have some tools that give you an edge.
Right.
But support for Premier customer is not something that's like in a call center. It's totally different.
Right.
And obviously, my knowledge about Active Directory and Exchange Server was not that deep. So if I would wanted to apply for, let's say, support only for Active Directory or for Exchange Server, I wouldn't have got the job. But for the Office part, let's say, they needed people that had some knowledge in this area and that would be able to learn and to become experts and kind of like lead the way then with Office 365 and everything that's online. And that was my luck, because that's how I actually got into Microsoft. Because they hired me. I also had my first manager there that was, for me, he's still a role model nowadays for what it means to be a manager. And even though technically I was definitely not very good at that point, he saw something then in me and had this faith and hired me. And basically in 2 years afterwards, he was very happy with that choice, because I kind of like grew a lot and became one of the main guys basically in whole EMEA on certain areas there, like ADFS and Azure Active Directory. Mostly that was what I was specializing in. But I started at Microsoft, and that was for me, let's say, the moment where suddenly I had this whole ocean of knowledge that I could access.
Right.
I had this whole ocean of tools that I had, because literally we could do everything there. Like we could spin up our own Exchange server environments, Active Directories, like servers, like networking. You could do everything there, everything virtualized, obviously. So for me, it was like a heaven, because I had a lot to learn there. So I really had a lot to learn.
Before we move on, this is just a reminder that I do have courses available on DomeTrain if you want to level up in your C# programming. If you head over to DomeTrain, you can see that I have a course bundle that has my Getting Started and Deep Dive courses on C#. Between the two of these, that's 11 hours of programming in the C# language, taking you from absolutely no programming experience to being able to build basic applications. You'll learn everything about variables, loops, a bit of async programming, and object-oriented programming as well. Make sure to check it out. And that would have been very different from the previous job, right? Because instead of just being at this point where it's like, oh, that's too complicated, hand it over, someone's got to go deeper, hand it over. Like, you are the team that is it's got to go deeper now. So, like, it's handed to you. And now you have these resources around you where you can and you are expected to be able to go deeper and diagnose things and stuff like that. So, yeah, that sounds, very cool.
Exactly. Still, obviously, also at the support level, we had kind of like some, let's say, a superior tier, like the seniors or premier field engineers or things like that. But the thing is, they wouldn't accept simply cases that you would transfer to them if you didn't do the things that you were supposed to do, and you couldn't really prove that you have done already your best.
Right. Yeah.
So it's not that you could simply say just, okay, I just give this to somebody else and they will take care, because they simply wouldn't accept that. So I needed to learn, and that's, I think, where it started, because when I was getting better and better to that, I was soon realizing that for most of the cases that I was working on, once again with customers like BMW and Coca-Cola, the British Parliament, Aston Martin, and so on. So we had customers like that, mostly in the EMEA region, but big customers, like big IT infrastructures and so on. So I saw that basically whenever we had a new call, there were a lot of things that we needed to gather, like a lot of logs that we need, a lot of dumps, a lot of information about their Active Directory and snapshot and performance counters and whatever. So there were a lot of repetitive tasks that we needed to do, and always we the first thing we needed to say, okay, we need this, so perform me these steps. Then they had a secure way to upload the results and dump files and crash files and whatever else we needed to that location. And then on those files, we just started the analysis.
Right.
But always this was the first step. So
I was see where this is going already, yes, which is awesome.
Yeah. So I was thinking, okay, but kind of like this is a little bit cumbersome because always I have to ask the same things. So right, we lose a lot of time potentially just for them to do that. Sometimes they didn't know exactly what I was asking for them because a lot of things were on Exchange Online or SharePoint Online or Azure Active Directory. And as you said, nobody was very familiar with that at that point. Yep. So even if they had great IT people in their environment at those customers, nobody was an expert on the online stuff, you know. So I was thinking, okay, how can I automate that, you know? Right. And I discovered PowerShell because there were a lot of things that we were doing through PowerShell. So I said at a certain point, and I remember that I basically stayed for one entire weekend. For me, it was like a hackathon. Obviously, it was outside the job hours. It was not paid as kind of like how do you call this, overtime? Right, but yeah. I wanted to do this for myself, and like a hackathon, I wrote a lot of different PowerShell scripts meant to kind of like take all this information that they needed or that I needed, and obviously I had access to whole resources and environments that I could set up with Exchange Server, Farms, and Active Directory and online. So we had at Microsoft, that was the good thing, the opportunity to have everything set up, like we can spin those environments up. Mm-hmm. So I basically think I slept for only 4 hours in 3 days. But in the end, what I had on Monday when I went to the office was kind of like some very powerful scripts that were gathering all this information for me.
And Dan, but at this point, you're not a programmer, right? Like you would say, like, I don't program, right? Like you knew that you had been using PowerShell scripts at work. You knew that there was some type of code or something associated with them. But at this point, you had not written, from your perspective, not written code before. Is that fair to say?
No. It was just PowerShell scripts. Obviously, it took so long because I discovered a lot of things about PowerShell because you can work with variables. You can, so there's a little bit of programming into it, and I think I'll come back to this very, very soon. But for me, yes, indeed, I didn't see this as programming. I just see this as scripting, okay, and try to kind of like make things easier for me. So at work, I started to use these scripts, like whenever, okay, hey, run this for me, and everything was collected automatically. It was literally, we didn't need to have a call for that to understand things. So just run me these scripts, I will get the results, and then if there's anything else I'll need, we'll have a call and we'll see. But customers did that. The scripts were working well. So suddenly my manager asked, and also colleagues, but how do you get things so fast?
Yeah.
And I said, well, because I have these scripts here, you know, that kind of like do a lot of stuff for me, so I don't lose a lot of time initially just to make the customer understand what we actually need from them. I just ask them to run these scripts, and then I get all the information back. So this already saves me a lot of time. So suddenly, people, also more senior engineers, were looking into it, and they say, "Hey, you've done some great job there." So we have started to use this basically in all our teams, and other teams that we had here, basically in EMEA, were starting to use the scripts that I have built. Now, those scripts was a little bit tailored for this specific online. We had mostly customers that were kind of like trying out or moving to Office 365, to Exchange Online, hybrid organizations, and so on. Sorry. But then the cool thing is that there was another guy at Microsoft, basically still in Romania, who saw my scripts and said, hey, you know what? I can do cooler scripts than that.
Okay.
So as a starting point, he started to do his own script, and then I was looking at what he was doing, and hey, but I think I could do this better. So there was kind of like a challenge,
Okay.
like
Yeah.
creating PowerShell scripts, like cool PowerShell scripts that can help. It was a challenge, a good challenge, because we were friends. Like we went out for beers, and it's not that we kind of like, I don't
Yeah,
know,
it
competed
wasn't
with
like a
each other.
nemesis, right? It wasn't like this
Yes.
guy at work sucks and he's trying to be better than me, so I got to show him who's boss. Like you guys were friendly
Yeah.
about it. So okay.
So the good thing is that I've learned a lot of PowerShell, a lot of PowerShell, and along the way, a lot of networking, a lot of bunch of other stuff. But the thing is that that was actually the point at a certain time when I was thinking, okay, but if I'm able to do this, could I maybe just really program? Because
Right.
for me, it was already kind of like the things that I do in PowerShell, they are pretty advanced, you know? So if I'm able to do this, maybe I'm able to also get into programming, you know? And that's when I decided that, okay, I want to start learn programming. And obviously the choice was .NET because I was at
Surrounded by
Microsoft. Yeah.
it.
But the thing is that we didn't have any programmers in Romania at Microsoft at that point, and I have some friends that are programmers, but they are mostly C++ embedded or PHP, and nobody was actually a .NET developer. So also in Microsoft, I didn't have where to actually ask a lot about this. So
Okay.
as we didn't have any programmers like in Romania in the immediate network that I had in Microsoft right there. So I needed to basically start out on my own. Obviously, for some things, I could look up some resources that we had internally at Microsoft that made things a little bit easier. But for a roadmap and how do I actually start to program? That was a question that I didn't find, or the answer I didn't find internally at Microsoft directly. So obviously, I started online, and I discovered there was this great course for me. This was the best, I think. I think it's Bob Tabor. It was called.
Okay.
There was a guy. He had a kind of like C# for absolute beginners course, where he would take you from like, okay, install Visual Studio and hello world. You know,
Right.
it would take you from there. So there was a version that was free, but there was then a paid version for it. And yeah, obviously, well, when I started at Microsoft, the salaries at Microsoft were good. So obviously, already as I've already grown, like I didn't have any financial constraints anymore, at least, you know. So Microsoft really offered me this kind of like financial freedom
Right.
to don't really care about the next day, you know, which enables you to then concentrate on other things. So I was able to spend, okay, this course, I don't know, it was $100 or something like that. It was not really a big deal, and I saw this as an investment in myself.
Right.
Even if I fail at programming, still it's $100. It's no big deal. So it's
Yeah.
okay. It's
The
affordable.
risk
So,
is low, right? You're
yeah,
not operating like, oh no, if I go spend this extra $100, like that might mean that bills are going to be difficult or food might be difficult. It's okay.
yeah,
I have an extra $100, so
exactly. I have an extra $100. Okay, I can spend them if I learn if it will be okay, if it will turn out good, then that's great. If not, then well, it's nothing lost.
then that's it.
Basically, yeah, that's it. You know, um, instead of investing in Bitcoin, which might have been a good idea at that
Yeah,
point,
hindsight. Yeah.
yeah, that's 2011. So yeah, you know, but I invested in that course, and that was kind of like very cool because I learned the basics, and I really understood basically that, hey, I can do that. You know, I discovered that I don't really need to be good at mathematics to
Right.
actually become a programmer, you know. And I've discovered that I can actually do some stuff and see instantly the result, like in a console or maybe in a Windows Forms.
Right.
So I see, okay, it seems that I can do this, you know. So I kept on learning programming. So I went over to Pluralsight and think basically there weren't too many options at that point. Like it was 2012, 2013. So you didn't have all this content that you have nowadays. Like nowadays,
There's a lot more content.
you have a lot more training platforms. You have a lot more YouTube content, free YouTube content. But even when it comes to training platforms where you have to pay, you have plenty of .NET content. Like at that time, there was virtually almost none. But there were two guys that were having kind of like trainings on Pluralsight about .NET. There was Sean Wildermuth, which
Right, yeah.
I think everybody knows. He's
Yep.
still nowadays one of the most well-known guys there. So I took his course about building APIs, and there was another guy, maybe not that popular as Sean, at least in the US, but probably popular in Europe, which is Kevin Docks.
Okay.
I'm not sure if you know him.
Yeah, the name is familiar. Yeah.
He had also some courses on .NET, like building an API, but he had also some other courses that were on authentication, authorization, more focused. And those courses actually talk to me a lot, because if we go just a few steps back at Microsoft, basically when I started to learn programming, I shifted a little bit my career. Instead of doing kind of like Premier support for Office 365 and mostly Azure Active Directory, because that was what I was concentrated on, and I became kind of like ADFS was a thing back then, you know. ADFS was used when you wanted to federate two, let's say, on-premises Active Directory organizations. Mm-hmm. But when you went to Office 365 with Azure Active Directory, if you wanted to have single sign-on, you needed to use ADFS. And I kind of like became quite an expert on Azure Active Directory and ADFS in EMEA. I was even started to travel to have workshop with customers, with Microsoft customers, with Microsoft partners to train other teams basically in ADFS and Azure Active Directory. So when I saw those courses about authentication and authorization, you know, this was the feeling that, hey, you know, this is an area that kind of like also overlaps with my previous experience, like with things that I already know and that I'm fairly good at.
Right, yeah.
And those courses then helped me to kind of like also understand programmatically. So as a programmer, how do I do work with these things that I worked on more or less, let's say, like a sysadmin, like
you see it from the other side,
yes,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's how I got into programming. And obviously the next thing that I wanted to do was say, okay, I need also to have a more practical reference. Now I have learned a fair amount of things about programming, about also APIs, but I need to build something, you know?
That was going to be my question, is like, I think a lot of us that are trying to put out content and help others, one of the things that's, you know, very common for us to say is like, make sure you're building things. And the landscape is obviously very, very different now. Like, as you were saying, even with paid courses, it's going to be limited nowadays. There's a lot more paid courses. There's tons of free information, and it seems like it makes the path you're explaining makes a lot of sense, where it's like, hey, I'm finding these resources, I'm going to try them out. But how did you shift gears, like, to not get caught in like tutorial hell or like course hell kind of thing to start building? Yeah.
No. Now that you put it this way, I realize that this journey to actually switch careers and kind of like switch and become a programmer, also it's not everything about the technical knowledge that you get, but it's also a lot about mental toughness and resiliency and the ability to kind of like understand exactly where you need to go to the next step and what that next step would be. And I think maybe my philosophy studies helped me a lot in this case with the critical thinking and understanding. But I think here, or this is exactly the point where most of the people would need a mentor, you know?
Right.
Because otherwise, if you don't really have built up this very critical and analytical thinking, you might get caught up, as you said, in tutorial hell and basically arrive at a point where you know the basics, but you feel that you never can get to the next step and then actually really get a job, let's say.
Right.
You know?
I know my if statements, I know my for loops, I know some of these concepts, but like, what am I doing with it? Like, if you put some code in front of me, I could probably tell you about it, but what am I doing with it?
Yeah, exactly. So I knew I needed to build something, and I started to actually do that. And it was not a web application, by the way, but the idea is that my wife, she's an architect, and she always complained about finding it very hard to kind of like track her projects and so on, and the financial part, but also the execution part.
Mm.
Like, she's an architect. I always say a real architect, like,
For real things,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. Okay, so I said, okay, let's build something like a program management tool for her,
Sure.
so that she could use that, And I started to build this. Well, obviously the choice was not the best in a Windows Forms application,
Sure, yeah.
but the thing is that the code is ugly as hell. But actually, I was able to build something that worked. And I've built it as a Windows application because I just built it. I've sent her the file, so I didn't need to install, I don't know, a lot of things. So I didn't really need an installer and things like that. So
Copy the files into a
copy the
folder.
files, run the application, bang. It had this SQLite database, so I needed to also look into that. So I was figuring that I can connect to an SQL database. So I was researching and I found SQLite. Okay, good, great. It's exactly what I need. So I
You
started.
need persistence, right? And you got it, and it's right there.
Yeah. And it was in the files that she copied, So she could potentially, if she could switch the computer, she could just, let's say, copy everything that she had in that folder on the new computer, and everything was working. So nothing was lost. So for me, it was kind of like everything was achieved. So I've built this application. I don't remember exactly how much time it did take me. Not quite a lot. Like, I think it was something like 2 or 4 weeks when I worked after hours, obviously, to build it. I was still working at Microsoft at that point, also traveling a lot with work, giving courses on the things that I knew.
Mhm.
And I built that application, and she started to really use it, and that was kind of like cool. I was very happy. So
She
yeah,
wasn't too critical of a customer. She wasn't,
yeah.
as your wife, she wasn't like, hold on, no, you got to fix all these things.
No, she actually was very happy and excited, and
Awesome.
yeah, she was okay, cool. And, she struggled with a lot of things. This application solved really a lot of her problems, and she was very, very, very okay with that. So
That's
that
awesome.
application, even kind of like, there were things that I needed to build there that I never studied in the courses that I had, because I needed to generate PDFs. So how
Right.
do you generate PDFs? So I need to search for that. Once again, kind of like searching for things was a little bit more difficult back then, but still you could find information in Stack Overflow. So I found a library. I don't remember if it was Iron PDF or something else. I think it was maybe something else. Obviously, I needed to find a library that was also free, or that had the free version.
Yep.
So I really hit some roadblocks there that I needed to solve and find solutions for them, and I found solutions for really every one of that. So I've built basically my first product, and that's the point when I realized that, hey, I can be a programmer. Like, I can do this professionally.
You
Obviously,
just
I
did it,
was
right?
aware.
Like, yeah,
Yeah.
you proved it.
So I was aware, even though I didn't really have all the knowledge to understand and say exactly why, but I was aware that the code that I've written obviously is bad, but I've built a working product, actually,
Mhm.
And that was the point where I decided, okay, I want to become a professional programmer, a professional engineer. So at Microsoft, once again, I switched a little bit the focus, and from focusing on Azure Active Directory and things, I became a partner technical consultant. I think this role still exists at Microsoft, although it's a little bit different right now, and concentrating on our ISVs. So suddenly I was starting. In the meantime, obviously Azure grew a lot and
Mhm.
become a thing, and everybody was moving to Azure. So part of my job was already involved a lot of coding, because I had to build a lot of proof of concepts. Mostly, okay, how do you work or integrate with Azure Active Directory, your application? How do you work with Azure Service Bus? How do you work with Azure SQL, for instance? How do you work with Cosmos DB when it came out later? a little bit. So I needed to do a lot of proof of concepts. It was still coding, but only at the proof of concept level. So, but I wanted to really become, let's say, I wanted to be part of teams that really build software, not just proof of concept, like software
Right.
that is shipped somewhere, you know?
Yeah, and for folks that are listening or watching, like sometimes like I spent a lot of my career actually like doing prototyping and proof of concept. So totally get it. And sometimes like people hear about this kind of thing and they're like, oh wait, like so instead of a feature team, you just get to look at all the new shiny things. And it's like, hold on, but there's a catch. And it's like you might code something and then throw it away and then do that on repeat for like every day for a month. And like you don't sort of get to see things grow and evolve as much because a lot of the time it's just a quick thing.
Exactly. And I think there is another big problem with this that I felt for myself. You never know how good is the code that you write because
Yeah.
nobody cares.
Because it's not the goal at that point, right?
Yeah.
And I've always said for people that aren't familiar with prototyping and proof of concepts, like the goal, I mean, the goal is to answer a question. That question might change. It might be like, is this viable for us, like technically? Is it going to be like a market fit? Like, do the customers like it? There's always questions that you're trying to answer, but one of the questions that you're generally not answering is like, is this code going to survive on? Because the answer is like, probably not. Like, you're just trying
Yeah.
to answer something else with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I felt that I couldn't really progress, basically. I had already my goal. I want to be a professional programmer. And
Right.
I felt that I'm stuck right now, you know? So that was the point for me when I decided, okay, I need to kind of like take a role that's full-time programming, and that's it, on things that you really build, on teams that are doing this basically for living, so that you understand also the code that you're writing. Is it good? Is it not good? Why is it not good? Because
Right.
that's the way that you can improve. Now, the problem was that at Microsoft, obviously, there was already a small team of development started in Romania. So theoretically, that would have been an option. However, the problem was there at Microsoft that, well, when you want to go for the interview, obviously, they start to ask a lot of questions about data structures and algorithms and reversing trees and I don't know, things like that. And obviously, I didn't study that. And I said, okay, well, there should be something different. I mean, I've just built some products. I do programming. It can't really be that whenever you become a programmer, everybody asks you these questions that you actually never use in real life. Although, obviously, my take on this right now, it's a little bit more nuanced, because if you're doing stuff for Microsoft or for Google or for things, probably you will also need to be aware and do stuff that they ask in the interviews.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I can totally agree and understand right now that in companies like this, they ask these questions because probably you will be faced with them. If you're at a startup or things like that, where you just want to build a product, there obviously you don't tackle these challenges that Microsoft or Google or Facebook does, to have the need to actually have that. And to put it in the context, for instance, the development team that was in Romania at Microsoft at that point was working on Bing Maps. Like, obviously, they were doing a lot of graph theory and graph traversals and things like that I didn't understand, but that's what they were doing, you know.
Mhm.
I also didn't really want to move out of Romania, so I started to look at things outside Microsoft. And that was the point where I've got this interview at the company that I'm also currently working on. It's called Zamdaris. And that's when I realized it was actually my first interview, that I was very bad at programming, you know, because they
Okay.
started to ask me a lot of things like clean code principles, like solid principles, and object-oriented principles. Now, the object-oriented principles I've seen in the courses, so these things were not totally strange to me, but I obviously didn't have a really practical understanding and practical reference on them.
Right.
But I had a very big advantage. I was very good with Azure, you know, in a
Ah.
time,
Okay.
2015, where people were not very good with Azure. So
Right.
I literally, in those times, I was an Azure expert, you know. And there weren't too many people in the company, and generally that were experts in Azure, you know. So they said, okay, we do here at the company mostly .NET stuff in those types, because not right now we are kind of like technology agnostic. We do a lot of other things. So they said, okay, this guy seems to know a little bit of programming, probably if it is just for his programming knowledge, we wouldn't hire him. But he worked at Microsoft. It means that he's probably smart and
Like
he knows
Microsoft
Azure.
said yes, right? So
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the bar should be set. Okay, yeah.
yeah. And he knows Azure. So what if we hire him, because maybe he can learn stuff, and maybe he can become useful for us. And they had faith in me and hired me as a junior software developer. Now the thing is, and I think I want to emphasize this because I think it's very important. Now you have to imagine that I was at Microsoft, where I was kind of like on a decent seniority there. Like my salary was quite high, like for Romanian standards was quite high, very high, I would say. So the thing is that I wanted to move to a field like software engineering, like become a full-time software developer,
Right.
where my knowledge was at a junior level, very junior level. Even if I did know Azure, but as a developer, kind of like compared to all the developers that they had, I was literally very, very low. So they couldn't obviously match and give me the salary that I had at Microsoft.
Right.
So I had this very important decision to make. So I say, I want to become a software engineer. So right now I'm at Microsoft. I have a decent salary. I'm okay with that. The thing is that how are things in most companies? Kind of like the salaries don't really grow a lot after a certain period of time. Like you get 3-5% every year or something like that. So now I want to go to switch to a software developer role where my salary will be 25% less, like 25%. It's a lot. Like still, it was not that bad when I started in a call center. So it's still, well, kind of like would be okay for a decent living in Romania.
Right.
So
It's not that it's bad, but it's
yeah,
definitely it's a 25% is a noticeable like kind of step back, and it would make you think like, okay, if my expenses look like whatever they are today, like what does it look like to have like 25% less
yeah,
income to cover all of these things, and
yeah.
how is my standard of living change?
Exactly, and I think we need to be aware that kind of like when you earn more, your expenses also get more. So
Yes,
the thing is
it's
that
very typical.
yeah, yeah. So I was in a place that okay, I was earning enough, but it's not that I could put or that I did put a lot aside at that point. So yeah, it was 25% or something, because we also had some loans that we had to pay. So it meant that we would need to cut some of the expenses, like to be a little bit more disciplined with that. So it was a big decision, and we didn't know exactly where. I didn't know exactly where this would take me. But I said, okay, this gives me the opportunity to go in this field to become a software developer. And I was saying, okay, and I'm bad right now. I'm a junior, but if I manage to succeed at Microsoft, I think I will be able to succeed also here as a software engineer.
Right.
So I said, okay, let's do that. So I accepted the job offer, and I think it was a very good idea right now. So it turned out well, let's say, 8 years after. So I think it's fairly okay. So yeah, but the decision. So one thing that we also need to understand, sometimes when we want to go for something, like it means that we might be also need to, well, go for a salary cut if we know, or if we have a hunch that that could be really in the long run a better step in our career. Like when I say a better step, not necessarily from a financial perspective, but also from a perspective that, hey, that's what I want to do. Actually, that's what I want to do, and it's fun for me to do, and I don't go to work and it's awful, because
That's
that's
such a
also important.
such a good point, right? And I think that for a lot of people, I mean, software engineering in particular is a pretty well paid field, which is great. But yeah, like the reality is, like, if you're in a job that you're not in love with, then yeah, like you're gonna be doing this for many years, unless you happen to win the lottery or something
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
exactly.
You want something that's going to be obviously paying you at least a decent rate, so that you feeling like you're not like financially scared or at risk or anything. But if you're not enjoying what you're doing over, however long our careers are, they're 40, 50 years or whatever, then what? Like, that's a big chunk of your life to not be enjoying things. So I would strongly suggest for people to kind of make the pivot when they start to realize, like, hey, I think I want to try this thing, because you have many years to get better at it. You have many years to kind of grow and get advanced and see like raises and higher paying roles and things like that. So I think it's definitely worth doing when you start to identify it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree with that. Definitely. So yeah, that's. I think this story got already a little bit longer
Oh, that's
than
okay.
expected, but that's how I actually got into programming. And then obviously, when I started to work there, I once again had a lot to learn. Had an opportunity to meet brilliant people there. Some of them are even nowadays my colleagues, so they are still there at the company. And I always kind of like say that, or I heard this. I'm not sure who said this at some point, but it was this idea that if you are the smartest person in the room, then you should leave the room.
Right.
So I never had this feeling that I'm the smartest person in the room. In the current company, and I still don't have this feeling. That I still have the feeling there are people there that are way smarter, and every day I get to learn something from them. So I totally love that. And I grew. I started to grow, to learn a lot, to write software professionally,
Hmm.
to get to understand technology better, to widen even my expertise in different areas of technologies. Uh, let's say uh, one thing about working in an outsourcing company is that you kind of like also switch the projects a lot,
Right.
and you get to understand the different industries, and I think that's a good thing. There are obviously also downsides working in outsourcing, so
Sure. Yeah.
definitely, but a good thing is that you get to understand more industries. You eventually get to understand and work with also different technology stacks, because at a certain point I worked for a customer, and they kind of like acquired some new product that needed to be integrated with their existing product, and guess what, that one was written in Node.js. So suddenly
Not C sharp.
no, yeah, no, not C sharp. Yeah,
What were they
guess what?
thinking?
Yeah. So I needed to go into Node.js, and obviously I already knew JavaScript because I was doing a web application, so it was not totally strange. But I went and I suddenly found out that okay, if you already know one language or one framework, and one framework, you can then go also to other languages, because there are a lot of languages that have a lot of similarities,
Mhm.
and you can learn them very easily. Like once you get the fundamentals, once you have what I would say the engineering mindset and the engineering way of looking at problems and trying to understand them and decompose them and solve them, then learning a new programming language is mostly a matter just of kind of like a time of a few weeks to learn a syntax, and that's it.
Yeah, you just need to start like making the time to practice it, because if you're not, like, it's not going to be familiar, right? Like, and I would say I've even had periods where I'm not coding the in the language, but reading it over a period of time helps. But I would, like, in order for me to be comfortable programming in I couldn't just read it. I would need
Yeah,
to
you
be
need.
writing the
Yeah,
code as well.
definitely, and yeah. Also for other projects, we have Spring Boot. So I eventually also got into Java a little bit. There were also some projects where we use some Python for some stuff for the customers. So I also got into Python. So I literally went into kind of like a different set of programming languages and tech stacks, and on kind of like understood a little bit what are the pros and cons, what are the good things about each programming language, about each stack. And this kind of like gave me a wider view and a wider understanding of technology, and uh, well, a better baseline for making decisions when you need to make decisions, for certain projects, which I think
Right.
it's it's a very important thing. And that's why I always advise people that they say, I don't know, for instance, also at work when we have there are a lot of developers that don't really want to go outside their comfort zone. So they are on a project, they say, I'm a .NET developer and I write C#, and suddenly I don't know, there's a need for me to write Java or to write Kotlin or to write I don't know what else, and I don't want to do that. And I say that's actually a very bad thing that you do for yourself,
Right.
because you kind of like put yourself limits with this. You limit yourself just in a small box, but you'll never have a wider understanding of what's actually outside that small box of yours. And that's the reason why you won't be able, when the time comes to maybe that you need to make some decisions about something that you don't really have the baseline to make those decisions. And that's what I'm trying to always mentor people about, to always be open to go outside. Okay, I understand that you can have a preference. Obviously, I'm still in love with C# and .NET, so that's my primary focus, and probably it will never change. But I always go, if needed, outside and try to understand these new technologies. Like when Next.js came out 1.5 years ago, obviously it's still JavaScript, but it was a new framework. Like React, they bragged a lot that, hey, at React is not a framework, it's just a library. You use it how you want, you know? Probably that's one of the reasons why React code bases are always awful. but then suddenly, you know, hey, here's a framework based on React. And if you take a look at it, it's the most opinionated framework out there. It's more opinionated than Angular or other frameworks. So obviously I said, okay, I need to investigate this, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
So even if I was already a technical director and I was not coding every day, I spent time at home to kind of like, okay, write an application in Next.js to understand the model, to understand the challenges, to understand to understand what happens. Now, there are a lot of programmers that I see encounter also at conferences, but also at work and at events. They don't do this, you know. So they just do their box. They stay in their box. But then the problem is that at a certain point, I know that there were some people that asked, how did I manage to kind of like arrive to this role of of a technical director, you know? And the reason why I arrived to this role is not because I stayed in the box, but because I went outside, you know, and that gave me a wider understanding of things and technology. And that gave me the baseline to make some good decisions that made some customers happy. And well, that helped me to get promoted. Like if you stay in your box, you'll never get to do that. And then you'll arrive at a certain point in your career where you will simply not progress anymore, you know?
Right. And no, that makes a lot of sense. I even like I know like I can identify for myself like I certainly focus on C# and .NET an awful lot. But there have been points in my career like I don't code at work anymore, but in my career where there have been things where like okay, we have to go find information about something, and there's a library that exists that does something, and it's not in C# and .NET. And it's like you better go figure out how it works. And like so I would have to go learn it, and we would either have to go wrap it to integrate with it, but I still have to understand it, or I would have to go understand the code in some other language intimately enough to say we need like a .NET version of this and go do it. So I I know like I love how you said it though, because I can definitely say that I am scared is too strong of a word and maybe not the right word, but I'm gonna use it because I can't think of a better one. I'm sometimes scared to go into these like new situations where I'm not familiar with the technology, right? Like I know .NET, I know C#, so I should stick with it. But I have found that every single time in my career where I am put into a situation that I don't know the thing, that yeah, it's a little awkward in the beginning and always results in like a tremendous amount of learning. Like it's almost like a step function where I'm like, instead of just kind of coasting along and being like, okay, like a couple more things I understand, it's like this sucks, it's awkward, and all of a sudden like step function, like okay, like I finally have this new perspective. So
Yeah.
I definitely hear what you're saying on that.
And I also had this feeling or being scared about this, but now I'm less and less scared. And you know why? I think it's a matter once again of a thought process. So I always tell to myself, I was in this situation already, I don't know, X times before, and I
Yeah.
did well. So I'm not scared to go into something because I know that historically I was able to comprehend things and to perform well and to understand them. So I simply always remind myself about this and just go all in.
Yep. In my experience, I have had approximately 0 times where it's ever been bad.
Yeah, yeah,
it's it's always, and I will say, it's always awkward. It's always like a little frustrating, but it's never been bad. It's always had a good outcome, and I've always learned a lot. So, exactly as you said, I am trying to do better at reminding myself, like, hey, look, like, every time this happens, good things are at the other side. So, like, just do it.
yeah, exactly. And I think this mindset also helps a lot with the imposter syndrome
Right.
that you might have. And actually, I think I can tell a story about this as well,
I would love that. Yeah.
because obviously my journey, as I have explained it so far, you need to understand that there were several times in my career where I felt this imposter syndrome very, very, very deeply. There are also times when I feel it, but not that deep. So it's something that doesn't really scares me or kind of like brings me into questioning. Okay, why am I doing this?
Right.
Should I literally do this, or maybe I should go do something else?
Yeah. Maybe
So
this isn't for me.
yeah, there are different levels of the imposter syndrome, but one moment where I experienced this imposter syndrome at a very, very high level was actually the first time I got to speak to a conference outside Romania. And it was a .NET conference. I know it was kind of like not a big one, obviously. And it was in Minsk, in Belarus. It was way before all these things happen right now. So there were things happening in Belarus. So there was a conference there. So I applied, and I don't know, because I applied to a lot of conferences, and kind of like I did get a lot of rejections, and I almost wanted to give up, but they invited me there.
Cool.
And the problem was there, once I arrived there, I was kind of like at some point at the conference day in the speaker's lounge. And in the speaker's lounge, there were people like Konrad Kokosa. I don't know if you know, it's the author of the Pro.NET memory management book.
Okay. Probably knows a couple of things. Yeah.
Yeah, there was Michael Steib there, which is the author of Hot Chocolate, the GraphQL library. There was Steve Gordon. I'm not sure if you know
I
about
don't know
Steve Gordon. Yeah.
Steve Gordon. No.
He is also, well, very well-known guy in the .NET world, at least in Europe. Like, he has
Okay.
also a lot of pro-site courses. He's really, like, he speaks at NDC, and he's
Okay.
really great at this. There was also there some guy from Microsoft. He was called, I remember the name, Egor Bogatov. Maybe the
Okay.
name doesn't tell a lot, but at a certain point, there was kind of like they were sitting at a table, this Egor with Konrad and with Michael Steib. They were literally talking about read-only spans and memory marshalling in making the some part of the hot chocolate library faster and more memory efficient. And I didn't understand a thing about what they were talking. Like, I
And
didn't.
you're like, I am a .NET developer, and I'm here to
Yes.
speak about this stuff. And like,
Yeah, I was there to
oh
speak
no.
about some API gateway called Oslo that I have used at work a lot and had working with it in production environment. So, but when I was there, I wanted to cancel my talk. Like, I was one step from going to the organizer and say, I want to cancel my talk. I felt it so badly there. Like, this idea that what am I even doing here?
Right.
These guys here, they are literally, well 10 levels above me, and they talk here. What am I doing here? So it was very bad. And by the way, there was also there that Kevin Docks, the
Oh
author
right.
of
Yeah.
some courses that I took on Pluralsight. So for me, that point was something like a point where I said, man, no, that's not gonna work. So I remember that I was just going outside and taking a walk, and I was thinking about this entire situation. And I've already interacted also with Conrad and with Michael and with Steve Gordon and so on. And I saw them like some kind of gods, obviously, but they were so friendly and kind of like not condescending at all. They were kind of like talking to me as I was their equal. And while I was walking and thinking about this and said, okay, but if this guy is okay, kind of like have this attitudes towards me, then probably, I don't know, I should give it a try with the talk and not cancel it, because chances are that also people at the conference might behave kind of like in the same way.
Right. Yeah.
Also, there was another thing that I was saying myself. Okay, I know this Ocelot API gateway. Nowadays, you also find a lot of articles about it, but at that point, it was something quite new, and we worked with it. I used it in a production application, so I was fairly confident that nobody in that room would have more experience with that piece of technology than me.
Right. You
So
had to remind yourself, right? Like
yeah,
I do actually know this thing. It's like you started to do this comparison with people in the room, it sounds like, where they're talking about things that you don't know.
yeah,
And they're people that you've looked up to, you've in some cases like taken their courses and going like, I can't compare to them. But you had this reminder to yourself, like, I actually do know this particular technology and like I have experience with it and I can talk about that.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And the last thing that I remember from that walk was one thing that also stood to my mind. I obviously always like looked up to Scott Hanselman, that you already that
Yeah.
on the podcast, and you are also colleagues. So I hate you for that. But I very often, since I was at Microsoft, was looking at him as a role model, like the way he
Mhm.
behaves, the way he talks at conferences, and the way his attitude. So for me, he was always a role model. And I remember that somewhere, I think on his blog, on some of his descriptions, is something like, I talk to whoever wants to listen, or something like that. So that phrase remained with me like for years already, and kind of like it reminded myself, like, okay, I talk to whoever wants to listen. Like, if there is anybody at this conference that wants to listen to this idea of this API gateway and how we used it in production, then I talk to them. If there are 2 people or 3 people or 10 people, I'll just talk to them. I don't care about this. If they want to hear that, I talk to it. So I went and gave the talk, and the talk went well and went smooth, and everything was okay. And but that was, I think, the moment where I experienced this imposter syndrome at the deepest possible level. And I think the next important thing to do is, when you get this imposter syndrome, like, the first step is to find this mental resiliency and toughness, and find things to actually get out of it, and
Right.
try to do the thing that you need to do, even if you doubt yourself a little bit. But then the next thing for me is always, okay, I heard these guys talking about things that I didn't understand. It's time to learn.
Right. It's an
So
opportunity now. It's not
exactly.
just a barrier. It's not this bad thing. It's like,
No.
okay, like you actually, it's cool because you used it as a feedback mechanism, right? You talked about overcoming it, which I think is incredibly important, but you also didn't just stop there and say, okay, I made it through. You said, okay, but I did have this feedback like from yourself, right? You kind of created the feedback loop to say that didn't feel good to be in this position where I didn't know about these things, but what can I do about that?
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted, the next time that I meet these guys, I don't want to have this problem anymore.
Right.
Obviously, they will still be much better than me, but at least I would have an understanding of what they are talking about.
And the
Because
really cool thing is if the exact same thing happened next time and it wasn't spans and memory management and the same group of people was talking about the coolest technology and you repeated the exact same thing where you went, oh no, I don't know this stuff. You could try to go through all the steps you just explained, try to overcome your imposter syndrome, and then go learn something new yet again.
exactly. Obviously, I did this very often afterwards. But you know what? That was the first time that it happened to me, that I had this feeling.
Right.
Once I did go through it, I basically created a framework for myself. So I created a framework. Whenever I encounter this problem, I know exactly what to do. And that's why I don't go in this type of crisis anymore. Because, okay, I'm in this situation, I have the framework I need to overcome to think about this, and then I need to learn. So I already had this set up for me mentally, and I simply apply it and reapply it whenever the situation occurs. And
Right.
the thing is that obviously that's a great way to learn, because that expands. This way you expand your knowledge and understanding very, very much. And it's kind of like very important from my point of view that obviously if I need right now, I'm not an expert on memory management, let's say,
Sure.
but I know enough about memory management and performance to understand when I'm in a scenario where this is important, and to know exactly where to get started,
Hmm.
and where to look and what are the first steps. And then that's everything you need to then actually learn to go in depth about it. So I have everything that I need to get started and to understand when this is important, and when I need to apply that, and where to start looking on how to apply that. And it's important, I think, to understand that uh, when you want to grow in your career, like eventually, what do you want to do after you are a senior software engineer
Sure.
or a
Yeah.
principal software engineer? What's the next step? And then, from my point of view, a lot of people fail or fall into this trap that they concentrate a lot on just one technology, like their box. I want to be good at C sharp. And there are people that I know, even maybe, well, people that I know, developers that I know, that if we would take a, let's say, C sharp test, the most in depth C sharp test that's possible, I'm sure that they would do better than me at that test. But they focused only on C sharp.
Hmm.
While I started to always expand a little bit my horizon. So it's I think it's important when you grow to still be good, very good in one area,
Hmm.
but then to expand. So it's not going only deep, but it's also to going wide.
Right.
Because this gives you a lot of context and understanding that enables you to make decision.
Right.
And
I've heard people describe this as like a almost like a T-shaped developer, and I've heard other like sort of flavors of this where you want to like the in terms of the T shape, like having breadth across some
Mhm.
range, but also depth is like the vertical
Yeah.
part of the T. Then I've heard of other people saying like a W-shaped developer. Like the point is like you want to have at least an area where you're like, this is something that I feel like I can go pretty deep on, but you don't want to just be like a vertical line in terms of depth. You
Mhm.
want to make sure you have some breadth to it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what enabled me, for instance, to kind of like have this role as technical director, because right now I'm guiding projects, and not all projects are .NET. Not all projects are only with Azure. We have AWS a lot also.
How
Um,
dare you?
yeah, because kind of like, yeah, I also wanted to go and had kind of like these experiences to also go a little bit wider and not only deep into one single technology. And
Right.
I think, especially now in this era of new I think that's actually one thing that developers need to do, because I think that developers that go only deep, they will be obsolete, because that the AI will be able to do the job probably as good as you, maybe even better. But what AI can't really do is making good decisions where there are a lot of variables in the context.
Right.
And that's where we need to have this system understanding, and understanding the high level picture, understanding constraints, understanding a lot of different things that AI doesn't understand, because it's based on creativity. And right now, AI it's not necessarily creative from my point of view.
Right.
So I think that for the future, actually, this will be more and more important for developers in order to bring more value, or to continue to bring value.
And we see this a lot, even like if folks are programming and you're using LLMs, like if you're using ChatGPT and stuff, you can act like there's. I know I work with one particular developer outside of Microsoft that he would say like he's not a programmer by any means, and he uses ChatGPT almost exclusively to be generating literally entire applications that are totally functional. But the thing that's interesting is that I totally agree with what you're saying. Like you can ask an LLM to go write code and it will do it. But the the part that's important is that we have this like extra perspective that we can add in, and we can say, hey, wait, no, like consider this now, or here's other constraints. And the LLM on its own is not doing that. So it
Mhm.
just goes, this is the instruction you gave me, here's something. but we have to be able to think about these other variables, and we have to make decisions and optimize for them, assign, like, from our perspective, the weight of these things, the importance of them, and then instruct the LLM to be able to say, like, no, actually, this is, I value, in this case, performance more, so go
Mhm.
make it less readable, or no, you have to use this particular technology. And without that guidance, like, it's going to give you an answer that's not necessarily wrong, but it might not be what you need.
Yeah, exactly. And it might be coded that's actually a hell to maintain, basically.
Yep.
Because, and I give literally, that's something that I've experienced this week, the past week. So I was using a lot this cursor, this new IDE.
I haven't
And
tried it yet, but I've
yeah,
heard about it. Yes.
it's impressive. It's really cool. Now I know Angular. I would consider myself, let's say, a mid Angular developer. Let's
Okay.
say. So I wanted, okay, let's build an application with Angular. And I started to build an application with Angular with Cursor, and basically relying mostly exclusively on prompts and code that Cursor was generating for me. And I created the application end to end without, I think I didn't write even 10 lines of code myself. And the application kind of like, well, became fairly big. It was not really a Hello World application. Now it was also not an enterprise application, but
Sure.
I had around 25 different components. There are a bunch of different types of services and so on and so forth. And the application was working. And obviously I did this faster than I would have done this kind of like if I wanted to do this without any help of Cursor and AI, especially because I haven't written Angular for 3 or 4 years. And Angular has changed a lot, even recently has changed a lot. But then again, 2 days ago or 3 days ago, I opened Cursor again to look at this application after, let's say, a break of 1 week that I didn't look at it at all. So when I opened that IDE and started to go through the code, I had this really, I would call it epiphany even. Man, this code here is really bad. Like, I saw there literally, there it was missing the new functional Angular way with the old Angular way with classes and inheritance. It was a mix of using directives and not using directives when they needed or they didn't need it. It wrapped a lot of things into observables when it was not the case to wrap things into observables. The code was very, very bad. Now, if you want to maintain this, like if any other developer would come on this team and work on this, they wouldn't understand anything from that code because literally every file uses different programming approaches and models. And okay, the LM helped me to generate this application. That's the real power of that. But in the end, if you don't have the skill to understand what it generates for you and that actually even that it helps you, you can't rely on it because you need to have a consistent programming model in the things that you write.
Right.
You need to adhere to certain principles, and if you're not aware of them, then AI will literally help you write more buggy code than before.
Yep. And it's interesting. I wonder, because, like, that totally makes sense. I, without even having seen the code, I can envision what that could look like, even using C sharp and having, like, these interesting, like, different patterns and coding conventions and stuff across a bunch of different files. But I'd be curious if you were to try it again and you're like, I want to prevent this from happening. I do wonder if you could sort of it working with the LLM, sort of prompt it to kind of guide it more to say, like, use these types of conventions, avoid these ones and stuff, and maybe the styling and, like, and stuff would be more consistent. That might be interesting to see.
You can definitely do that, but then the thing is, first of all, you still need to have the knowledge to instruct the LM to do that.
Exactly. You have to know that to be able to even
If
tell
you
it that in
don't
the
know,
first place.
because people that say that, okay, well, why do you need to learn that? Because you can use an LLM, because you don't know what to tell your LLM to do, and you don't have a critical way of understanding what the LLM generated for you, and eventually give some other prompts to kind of like reshape that or have that better. So first of all, you need to have this understanding, and if you don't have it, then this is a big problem. And then the second part is, there is a point, I think, when if I still need to do a lot of follow-ups, it might become actually more productive for me to write me a certain things myself from scratch,
Right. Yeah.
And then when I can instruct the LLM, like in Cursor, it's fairly cool because you can give the files or you can give more files as context and even pictures and generate the prompt based on that. And then you can set up things, the different things by yourself, and then take them as a context and say to the LLM, okay, help me do this now based on this context. And then the chances are that it gets better, But I think this is also kind of like an example on why I think that LLMs won't definitely replace programmers, but it will replace programmers that are only focused and that understand only a narrow, very narrow set of things, because they will not have the ability to understand the wider picture and understand what did the LLM generate for me? Is it secure? How does it perform? How does it do?
Because
Is
they're
it
not thinking about
maintainable?
these things in general,
Yes,
right? They're not
yeah, yeah,
going
yeah.
broader. Yeah.
So obviously, those developers that have this very narrow and strict mindset, I think they will have a problem with AI in the near future. But if we can adapt, and developers that can adapt and that have also the breadth of understanding, so that they can use the LLM to their advantage, they can definitely become more productive and bring more value.
Yep, I totally agree with that. I'm personally of the mindset, like, at least in the foreseeable future, like I disagree with a lot of like the CEOs and stuff that are saying, oh, like, developers are going to be obsolete in like a couple of years or something. I don't think that's the case. And for a lot of the exact same reasons that you're saying, like, I think that, as you said, like, we need to evolve, and I think that's absolutely the case. I think there are going to be things. It's kind of like when we started. This is just my perspective from even over the last 12-ish years, seeing like in some cases manual testing roles where, like, if people weren't getting more creative about how they were testing things, like, yeah, we could go write automated tests to go do the exact same things that you're always doing. Now, it doesn't mean that manual testing or doing manual validation is bad or it's obsolete, but there are certain things that absolutely could be automated. And if you didn't adjust, then yeah, your entire role might be obsolete. And I see the same thing could happen if we're not adapting. Like, we need to make sure that we are thinking more broadly. We're thinking more from like a system
Mhm.
perspective. We're asking these important questions, like truly around the engineering part, not just like specifics about the code. So
Yeah. So the way I say it, like, if coding is your superpower, then you'll have a problem. But if engineering is your superpower, then I think you're fine. But
yeah.
regarding QAs, I think that I see, let's say, a higher risk for manual QA to kind of like have a lot of their part of the jobs kind of like done by some form of AI. And that's why, for instance, in the company in Amdaris, we have initiatives to kind of like teach all the QAs automation, because I think that might be valuable for them in the future. And if they don't do it right now, it could be, I don't say that definitely it would be, but it could be, there is a higher probability that, yeah, they won't bring enough value to justify a job.
Yeah.
So we have
I could
this
definitely see that.
effort to go into automation because of that. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, for at least, and this is still going back, yeah, like before LLMs and stuff. Even for the QAs and testers that I would work with before, it was more like move from just manually testing things. Like, don't think about your job as like it's a manual, repetitive effort.
Exactly.
That you can be a user proxy and like give feedback as a user. Like, that's super valuable in terms of usability and things like that. You're literally a person, and if it's awkward for you to use and you're stumbling through it, like, that's good feedback to have. And being creative about things that we should be considering testing. Aside from that, like, helping with automation, I think, is key. But if you're like, the way you said it, like, if your superpower in this case is like, I can go through the list of things to go
Yeah.
click and do them on repeat, I'm like, that's actually a computer's superpower, and unfortunately it's significantly better than humans.
Yeah. Yeah. And they don't get bored. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the other thing. They don't get bored. No, Dan, I wanted to ask in the last couple of minutes here. I know, like, for you, content creation is a big part of what you do. I know you speak and things like that. So, I wanted to kind of hear from you. You talked a lot about your career and how things have changed and how you like your perspective on things. How does content creation and speaking and like these are, to me, they seem like on the outside like this is a huge opportunity for you to be giving back to others and kind of sharing your wisdom and stuff like that. But I'm inventing this in my head. Like I'd love to hear from you if like that's the case or
Yeah.
the motivation and things like that.
Actually, it is very intentional, and it always was a very conscious effort about this. Now, I wouldn't bring conference talking or speaking at conferences as being part of this mindset of this
Okay.
conscious effort to give back, because to be honest, for me, it was initially more a thing like of an ego to talk
Sure.
at the
Okay.
conference
That's fair.
to
Yep.
see if I can do that. So I didn't really see it as giving something back when talking at conferences. It was more like a kind of a goal for me that I wanted to achieve. But on the other hand, and that's one thing that actually I didn't talk about a lot, is that from the moment that I actually started to learn programming and understand that, hey, okay, I managed to do this. Mostly, I managed to do that on my own, because at that point there were not that many resources. Didn't have the people that could really mentor me. So I really did this on my own. But I realized and recognized that it's actually very tough and challenging, and that people that might want to do exactly the same thing, that they might need actually some guidance and some help on their way. And starting already, I think with 2015, like when I was still a junior, so I wasn't that good of a software engineer, but I already have this idea. Okay, I think I'm not that good. I'm not the best. I still have obviously a lot to learn, but I think I know already enough that I can maybe try to also help others that want to do a career shift like I did. And actually, the name Codewrinkles, the company itself, because there's also a company behind it, started uh, in 2016, right from this idea, because I've created this company where I wanted to organize trainings and courses only for people that wanted to kind of like get into programming from something else. Now, probably I was also very bad at marketing as a company that didn't really work very, very well. But what I managed to do is still I got in total, I did mentor on myself like directly, I think probably around 30 people. Most of this mentoring was in the end done for free, so not on the company itself. And I mentored people that were professional dancers, people that were cooks, people that were salesperson in kind of like retail,
Mm,
people that were, I don't know what, drivers, for instance, people that were librarians, nurses. So I worked with a lot of different people, and from all the people that I've mentored, actually, when I say the number, it doesn't really seem very high, but I think 15, around 15, they are nowadays professional software engineers. Some of them are already senior engineers. They are very good, but I think what we can actually learn from this is making this type of switch in your career and learning to become a software engineer. It's definitely doable, but
mhm.
it's not easy. It
Right.
takes a lot of commitment. It takes a lot of resiliency. It takes a lot of mental toughness and consistency, because otherwise you will simply not be able to do that. And the main reason is that you will still need to work a full-time job and do this basically on your free time. It means that you will have to invest a lot, that will have to deep prioritize maybe some other parts of your life.
Mhm.
So that there are sacrifices that need to be done, because if you don't put in the work, and consistent work, that's not a journey that you'll make in 6 months. It will take 1 year, 1.5 years, maybe 2 years. You never know exactly. Uh, so it's an effort. It's a long-term effort that you need to do, and that's why not everybody that tries this journey really succeeds, because they simply give up. And
Right.
I don't blame them, because it's hard. It's hard, but it's doable. The message is it's doable, but it's hard. It's not easy. So people, they say that it's easy. It's BS. It's not
It's
easy.
very misleading. Yeah.
Yes.
It's like I was talking about this the other day when I was saying like uh for me, like I've been fortunate in my career journey and stuff, but when I think about it, like I went to university, it was like the sort of like traditional path,
Yeah.
but it's not like when I graduated university, one of the things that I had an advantage for was that I had 2 full years of work experience because I had 6 internships.
Yeah.
But those internships I didn't just get for free. I still had to apply to all of those. Like they were jobs. So
Correct.
I had to spend the 5 years straight of busting my butt. So yeah, at the end of 5 years, was it like air quotes easy to get a job?
Mhm.
Like it helped, but I had to go do all of that work over 5 years,
Exactly.
not like a 4 week course, and then I
Yeah.
expected to be able to just like have it mastered.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because I think there's a lot of stuff out there now that is misleading that way. Like, hey, don't worry, just do this thing in a couple weeks. You'll be an expert. You're gonna get $100,000 a year job, and it's like, is it possible? Like, yes, but is it realistic? Like,
No.
no, it's
No.
gonna be
It
hard.
could be that you are some kind of genius, and that really that, but I think these cases are very rare. Like, not everybody is David Fowler,
Yep,
or
exactly.
like a,
Well, and the other thing I wanted to briefly bring up because it came up earlier in the conversation, right? Is that so? I think the way you explain that is awesome. I think we have so many things that stop us from even getting started, right? And I think if you can at least get started, that's when you're going to be facing the stuff that's going to be the hard stuff, and you got to stick with it. But you also might realize as you go through it, you might realize that you don't enjoy it, and that's actually okay
it's
because
okay, definitely.
if you go into it and you're genuinely trying and you're like, I actually don't like problem solving like this. I don't feel rewarded once I get stuck on a problem and overcome it. Like it isn't going to be for everyone. I do think that everyone can and should try if they're interested, and I think that they can succeed if they stick with it. It might take a while, but if genuinely, if you're going through it and you're like, I don't enjoy this, then I would not chase software development and software engineering for a salary. If you're like, I hate everything about this, but the money's going to be good, like you might as well go find the thing that you love to do.
Yeah, because
That's the
it,
time to
it
go.
will lead to frustration, depression, and a lot of mental health problems in the long term. And I remember one of the examples that kind of like was also sticks to my mind from my first manager at Microsoft. We had a chat about kind of like this idea of salaries and money, and he said kind of like this example: what if I'll give you starting tomorrow a salary of $10,000, let's say, and your job would be to kind of like take those boxes of print papers, there are 500 in them, and your only job is to count them to make sure that there are really 500 in each box. For how long do you think you would be able to do that, and the thing is that if you really do this exercise and see yourself counting those papers, 1 month, 2 months, okay, $10,000 sounds good, they count. But there will come a point soon enough where that money will actually not compensate for the frustration that this job actually gives you. And it's same with software engineering. Like, if it is really a field that doesn't give you, or that you're not passionate about, that you don't feel rewarded of doing, then don't do it. Because in longer term, you're doing yourself a disservice, basically.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And I thought it was important because I also like advocating for people. Like you should try not to put the like don't be a gatekeeper even for yourself. Unfortunately, there's enough other people
Yeah.
gatekeeping, and it is going to be hard. But that reminder that you should try, and if you don't enjoy it, be honest with yourself. It's okay. But Dan, where so Code Wrinkles on YouTube, absolutely. Where else can people find you if they want to learn more about you, if they want to get in touch with you? Where are the best places to find you?
Well, that's a good question. I'm literally on most of the social networks. Although when it comes to this type of more technology, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me with my name there, not with Codewrinkles, but with my name. So you can find me there. On Twitter, you can find me as well. Well, X. Sorry, I'm
Oh,
old
yeah.
and I'm accustomed to Twitter, so it's hard to change habits.
I'm not calling it X, I don't think ever, so it's okay.
Yeah, okay. So I'm also there quite a lot. Obviously on Instagram I'm there as well. You can find me with my name, but on Instagram I usually don't post tech related stuff or less tech related stuff. It's more personal, like photographs
Cool.
from hikings and running and I don't know
And
all
running,
type of things.
yes.
Yeah. So basically on LinkedIn, on Twitter, there's also Codewrinkles blog that I write on sometimes, and you can definitely also visit that place. But I'm mostly here on this one, on so YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter X. That's where you can find me and get in touch with me. Definitely.
Perfect. And I'll make sure I'm going to put links in the description and the comment and stuff so people can check you out. And Dan, I wanted to say I've really enjoyed talking with you. This has been, I kind of said this before we started recording, but it's a really cool opportunity for me because right when I had started trying to put content out and stuff, you were someone that had stumbled upon my channel, gave me a little bit of a shout out, which is super cool. And that's over a year ago now. And it's really cool to be able to connect with you. I've really enjoyed engaging with you on social media and stuff. I think most things it's really cool. Like I think we agree on most things. I think there's a couple things we don't agree on, but
And it's
at this,
normal. It's okay to
yes, and
disagree.
I was literally vlogging about this in a video this week because I was like excited for this conversation, and I had mentioned in that while we probably agree on most things, the things that we disagree about, I've never been like, oh, Dan, like, how dare you? It's like, actually, like, no, cool. Thank you for sharing that perspective. Because, in my opinion, we're not going to agree with everyone, and being
Yeah.
able to learn from other people, just their perspective is hugely valuable. So, I've always enjoyed being able to have conversations with you. So, for me, this was super
But
awesome.
I wanted to say something regarding this. Well, the shout out that you mentioned. Actually,
Sure.
I remember quite well when I was. I literally had this idea that okay, my channel was not that big, but still it was kind of like I had I think around 14K subscribers then, and I was looking to say okay, there are quite a lot of people right now that also try this idea of doing content on YouTube and that have less than 5,000 subscribers. So what if I could use my platform, even if it's not the biggest one, even if it's not like the scale of Nick Chapsas or Milan or
Sure.
so,
Yeah.
but it's still a platform, you know? What if I could use that to actually try to, I don't know, promote some guy, somebody that I find useful actually, or that I really like. So I did a lot of research there and going through a lot of different channels, and I didn't know your channel till then, and it was actually on that Discord community like we.are.net, where I think I heard about you.
Oh,
So
cool. Yeah.
so I went through the videos that you had and the things that you were explaining how, and I was, dude, but how comes this guy has so few subscribers? I was like blown away. His content is really great. I think he's better than my content. Like
Oh, thank you.
it's impossible, you know. And it was kind of like a no-brainer. Okay, this guy should be on my list definitely. And so it came to the fact that I definitely also included you in that video. And I'm really happy that, as I said, even if my platform is small, it's not the big scale, but still, I think people generally should try more to use their platforms to also help other people grow.
Right.
And that's generally in life, in career, but also in content creation. And unfortunately, I think we would need more attitudes, more mindsets like this
Yeah.
in the content creators community, let's say. Because unfortunately, I see very often that happen things when some creators actually try somehow to not just have disagreements, but maybe somehow belittle a little bit other creators. So I think creators should consciously use their platform a little bit more to also help others grow. You know, I think that's something that we're still missing as a community.
Yep, there's a huge opportunity to help others, and it doesn't take an awful lot of effort to be able to help and collaborate versus kind of like to tear things down, right? So
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. And Dan, I don't know if you're up for it, but I definitely want to have another one of these at some point, and I would love to. Maybe it'll be a live or something. I don't know, but we should get into some code at some point because I think that
Yeah.
would be super cool if you're down for it.
I'm always up for things like this. So yeah, we can
Cool.
definitely plan that.
Awesome stuff. Okay, well, Dan, I wanted to say thanks again so much. This was truly an honor for me, and we'll definitely sync up for another one in the future then.
Also, thank you for having me. Felt really like we know each other for a long time in this discussion, but we
We
actually
we
never
have
met.
we
Yeah,
have known each other for a little while. We
yeah,
just haven't
yeah,
met yet.
yeah. Exactly, exactly. So thank you very much for having me. I really
Of
appreciate that.
course. Okay, thanks, Dan.